Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Back in the day when this channel didn't even have 100 subscribers, I did my very first Iceberg video, the Japanese horror film Iceberg, and I was way in over my head as it took me several months to complete the whole thing, and at the time the production was less than stellar. Bad audio, messy visuals, and nothing interesting on screen other than my stupid face. Yeah, it was back when I wore that gray mask and everyone called me Slender Man. Well, I've always thought it was a really fun Iceberg, but those videos are almost unwatchable, especially to the majority of my subscribers who are used to a completely different style and quality. So I thought, why not remaster the J-Horror Iceberg with actual visuals and much better quality all around? I'm going to do these in a similar fashion to how I did them originally, with the Iceberg descending by obscurity. However, I'll organize each tier by least to most disturbing just so it doesn't jump all over the place, starting in today's video with the first two tiers. This Iceberg chart was originally made by Blonde Boys on Reddit, and I'll put a link in the description to the original chart. Thank you guys for all the support over the last year and a half since I originally covered this Iceberg, and big shout out to all the diehards who have been watching since the beginning. This is the Japanese horror film Iceberg, Part 1. So let's get right into Tier 1. The description for this tier reads, if you bring these up in public, people will likely know them. Starting with Godzilla. Godzilla might be one of the most popular foreign films ever made, and it's not just part of Japanese pop culture, but a large part of American culture. There's some people wondering why Godzilla would be on a horror iceberg, but the original Gojira film was considered really frightening upon its release in 1954. Keep in mind that nuclear bombs were dropped on Japan less than 10 years earlier, and that Godzilla was a representation of nuclear weapons. I imagine the imagery was pretty unsettling for the people so near to the events. Ringu. The Ring is synonymous with Japanese horror, at least it is in America. The fact that we remade it here proves how big of a hit it was. You don't even have to be a Japanese horror fan to have heard of it. Hell, Scary Movie even parodied it. The basic premise of this film is that there's a videotape and anyone who watches it dies in 7 days. The videotape shows a girl crawling out of a well, and it's later discovered to be a young psychic girl who is bludgeoned to death and thrown down a well. This one's more spooky than it is disturbing. There's not even really any particularly gruesome kills, but that doesn't mean it's not creepy as hell. Ju-on, The Grudge. This is another one you've definitely heard of, as it's also had an American remake and was also parodied by Scary Movie. I don't know if that's relevant other than to show that it was a big deal enough in America to be parodied. Anyway, the basic premise is that a husband finds out his wife is in love with another man, and in a rageful fit, he kills her, their son, and their cat. They end up coming back as vengeful ghosts that haunt the most recent family to move into the home. Classic, creepy haunted house movie, and the images of the ghosts are just iconic. Perfect Blue. Perfect Blue is an animated psychological thriller about a pop star named Mima who leaves her pop group Cham in an attempt to pursue a career in acting. She ends up being stalked by an obsessive fan and learns about a website called Mima's Room that has entries written from the perspective of Mima. This leads to Mima developing a psychosis, and she ends up having trouble distinguishing between reality and her work. Many disturbing themes are explored here, including personality disorders, stalking, and assault. I won't ruin the ending, but there are definitely some great twists along the way worth watching for. Audition. You've likely heard of Audition because it's probably the most referenced Japanese film, at least in the realm of more disturbing horror movies. Quentin Tarantino even said it was one of his favorites. Essentially, the film is about a widower, Shigeharu Oyama, whose friend, a film producer, creates a mock casting audition at which young women audition for the part of Oyama's new wife. He's immediately enchanted by a beautiful woman named Osami. So as it turns out, Osami is an absolute psycho hose beast who has a real thing for torture and murder. Eventually, she captures Oyama and tortures him with needles, sticking them under his eyes and cutting off one of his feet with a wire saw. Oh yeah, and she also keeps a man in a sack in her apartment who's missing both feet, his tongue, one ear, and 3 fingers on one hand. At one point, he crawls out of the sack and begs for food, and then Asami vomits into a dog dish and places it on the floor for him, which he hungrily consumes. Well, that's a hell of a way to end Tier 1. I mean, Jesus Christ. But hey, it's going to get a whole lot worse from here, so let's keep it moving to Tier 2. Tier 2's description reads, very popular fan favorites, widely released classics, essential viewing. Let's start with Kwaidan. Kwaidan is a collection of 4 ghost stories based on Japanese folklore. The Woman of the Snow, or Yuki-onna, follows a woodcutter named Minakichi whose friend is killed by Yuki-onna, but she spares Minakichi because he's young and handsome on the condition that he never tell anyone what happened. A few years later, he ends up finding a beautiful woman in the woods named Yuki. So you can kind of see where this is going, but he marries her and has children with her until one day he notices a resemblance between Yuki and the Yuki Onna and tells her about the strange tale. Turns out, if you hadn't guessed, that she is the Snow Lady, and even though he broke his vow not to tell, she spares his life because they have children together and leaves. This is a good indicator of the difference between the folklore of different countries, because the idea of him marrying and having children with a ghost just seems so bizarre, but I guess that's what makes it an interesting tale. The next tale, Oichi the Earless, is literally about a musician having his ears ripped off by ghosts, and In a Cup of Tea is about a man who sees an apparition in the reflection of his cup of tea. But I think the black hair is my favorite. It's about a swordsman who divorces his wife in order to marry a woman of a wealthy family to attain greater social status. He ends up regretting it and leaves to return to his old wife years later. He's surprised to find that his house and wife are completely unchanged and talks with her till he falls asleep. When he awakens, he realizes he's lying next to his ex-wife's rotting corpse. He begins to rapidly age as he attempts to escape the house, which is now in ruins. When he finally does, he's attacked by his wife's black hair and killed. Pretty cool. Kuroneko. Kuroneko is another classic horror film about two women who were killed by a troop of samurai. For whatever reason, a black cat licks their corpses, which resurrects them. They come back as vengeful ghosts and begin killing the troop one by one, often biting their necks out like cats. There's not much more to say about this one, other than when they come back as ghosts, for some reason their eyebrows are really high up on their heads, and it just looks really weird. Onibaba. Onibaba, or Demon Hag, is another 60s classic. The movie follows an older woman and her daughter-in-law who have a nice little racket of killing passing soldiers and selling their armor like it's an Elder Scrolls game or something. They dump the dead bodies in a giant pit in the middle of a field. Anyway, their neighbor Hachi returns home from war and tells the women that their son/husband died, and the older woman warns her daughter to stay away from Hachi because she blames him for the death of her son. But too bad, they start banging on a nightly basis and the mom gets pissed. One night, a passing soldier in a mask asks the old woman to guide him through the area. He says he wears the mask to protect his handsome face. Well, the old hag kills him and takes the armor and mask, which was actually hiding his hideously deformed face. She then uses the mask and armor to scare her daughter away from Hachi and convince her that she's a demon. However, she realizes that after being rained on, the mask can't be removed. She begs the daughter to help her, but they still can't remove it. Finally, the daughter breaks the mask off with a mallet, revealing her mother-in-law's face to now be deformed like the soldier. Thinking she's actually a demon now, the daughter runs from the older woman and leaves her. Oh, and also Hachi's killed by a looter. But hey, he got some sweet ass before he left, huh? Dark Water. From the director of The Ring, Dark Water captures a similar tone and focuses on the supernatural, ghosty kind of stuff. It follows a divorced mom who's forced to live in a rundown apartment with her daughter. Creepy stuff starts happening, she starts seeing a ghost girl, all that fun stuff. Nothing particularly horrifying or disturbing to point out here, but that's because the real horror of the film comes from the atmosphere, so I don't want to explain the entire plot beat by beat because I think that the movie just needs to be watched to be appreciated. Check it out. Hausu, or House. House is a really strange horror comedy movie from 1977. Essentially, a high school girl named Gorgeous goes to stay with her aunt and brings some school friends with her. Turns out the house is haunted and the friends are all slowly killed off. Although that quick summary makes it sound like a huge cliche, the movie is very original, mostly because of its bizarre effects, crazy cool music, and comedic moments woven in. There are some semi-disturbing scenes, like a girl getting her fingers bitten off by the piano, a bodiless floating head, and killer mattresses. In the present day, it comes off more funny than it does scary, but if you're in the right mindset, the trippy nature of the movie can give you the creeps, and even if you're not scared, you can't say you're not entertained. Pulse, or Kairo, essentially follows several people in their interactions with spirits. Several people start going missing, and anyone who has interactions with the ghosts start acting closed off and catatonic. This movie's really interesting because it escalates further than you would think. At first, it seems like any other horror movie that's mostly just involving a few characters, but it ends up scaling to the point of Tokyo having to evacuate because the ghosts are actually invading our world. I think that's pretty cool because a lot of these types of movies are based on the personal experience of the main characters, and usually no one believes what's really happening to them. But here it's like, no, there's ghosts, everyone knows it, and they're reacting to it on a global scale. There's nothing too graphic in this movie, but a couple of scenes are unsettling, like a woman jumping off of a balcony and hitting the ground, which is really cool looking because it's all one shot. They don't cut away or anything, and the effects look really cool. Noroi the Curse. Found footage films don't have a great reputation, mostly because the gimmick was just overused in the 2000s, and you can watch my found footage Iceberg video if you want to see more about that. But as far as found footage goes, Noroi the Curse is considered one one of the best. A lot of that has to do with great acting, which makes it really feel like you're watching a real documentary. The idea is that a paranormal investigator is making a documentary called The Curse. He ends up disappearing after his house is burned down and his wife is found dead in the ruins. This is all explained in the introduction before said documentary begins to play. It's a really well done film for such a low budget and has some really disturbing moments, like a boy being beaten in the head with a rock before becoming possessed, a woman setting herself on fire, and several rituals that require human fetuses to complete. One particular scene shows one of the characters surrounded by writhing human fetuses. So yeah, fun times. Tetsuo the Iron Man is a film about a man slowly turning into a metal abomination. The movie has a large cult following and is praised for its low budget, as director Shinya Tsukamoto directs, stars in, and even financed it himself using money saved from his day job. Man turns into a metal abomination summarizes this one pretty well, but it's so insane, I'm just gonna walk you through the whole thing because it's non-stop bonkers. The film starts with the metal fetishist heading into his hideout. He cuts open his thigh and thrusts a large metal rod into the wound. Later, he unwraps the wound to discover it's rotting and covered with maggots. Horrified, he runs outside into the street and gets hit by a car. We then see a businessman shaving and finding a metal piece protruding from his cheek. When he touches it, it spurts blood. He covers it with a bandage and heads to work. While at the train station, a woman waiting next to him sees a metallic flesh blob on the ground and touches it. She then becomes a zombie-like creature possessed by the metal fetishist, I guess. The salaryman's arms turn to metal as he grabs the zombie and breaks her in half. He then dreams of his girlfriend who has a metallic hose-like phallus that she then sodomizes him with. What the hell is this movie? He then begins to transform again and his penis turns into a drill. He starts to attack her, but she manages to incapacitate him with a blow to the head from a frying pan. He regains his strength through electrocution by sticking a knife and a fork into an electrical socket. Finally, she stabs him in the neck with a kitchen knife. For whatever reason, she starts kissing and licking his face as she stabs him, so that's uncomfortable. Believing that she's killed him, she kills herself by impaling herself on his dick drill. The man awakens, still alive, and creates a sort of bathtub shrine with the corpse of his girlfriend. He also has a weird hose coming out of his mouth that squirts oil into her mouth for whatever reason. So anyway, it turns out that it was actually the man and his girlfriend who hit the fetishist with their car at the beginning of the movie. They apparently hid his body in the woods and then had sex on a nearby tree while the dying fetishist is forced to watch. So now the fetishist is out for revenge and he tells the man he's coming for him. And while on his way, he starts turning random objects into metal, including some cats. Eventually, the fetishist and the Iron Man now have a battle, which ends with the metal fetishist showing his plan to turn the entire world into metal. They then merge together into a bizarre tank-like object and declare to put this plan into action. This is one of those movies that first sent me down the path of bizarre splatterpunk Japanese films and body horror. The movie is harsh on the senses in a lot of ways, but I really appreciate it because of how creative it is, and I have to give props to Shinya for just making his creative projects happen. I love watching people say, "F it, I'm gonna make my own damn movie," and because of the low budget and the fact that it's shot on 16mm, it just has an interesting style and vibe that you would never get in a film with a higher budget. If you really want to try out something different, something creative, check out Tetsuo the Iron Man, although I will warn you, it's insane. Ichi the Killer. So this movie has been banned in several countries, including Norway, Malaysia, and Germany. In a lot of other places, the film's been released but cut down and censored a decent amount, and trust me, you'll understand why soon enough. So the movie starts out with a pimp beating up on a prostitute. He notices that Ichi, the titular character, is standing on the balcony watching. When the pimp goes out onto the balcony, Ichi's gone, but he left a little souvenir because apparently he was beating off out there. So now guess what? No, seriously, take a guess. The title of the movie appears in the splooge that he left behind. What kind of an opening is that? So the plot of this movie can be hard to follow, but the gist of it is that a young man named Ichi is a deadly killer when enraged and is being psychologically manipulated into assaulting or killing rival faction members of feuding Yakuza gangs while being pursued by a sadomasochistic enforcer named Kakihara. Kakihara is an interesting character who's often confused for Ichi because he's on all the promotional photos and just stands out more, mostly because he has a Glasgow Glasgow smile, which an easy explanation of a Glasgow smile is what Heath Ledger's Joker has. Basically, the mouth is cut open on both sides. Anyway, it's weird because it's as if his hasn't really healed back together and is only kept closed by 2 lip piercings he has on both sides of his mouth. He even blows smoke out of them, and at one point he takes the piercings out and fits a whole man's fist into his mouth like a snake. It would take me forever to go into every part of the plot here, but this movie is extremely brutal, and I thought it was worth mentioning some of the more disturbing scenes. So first of all, there are a lot of bloody bodies, body parts, organs, you name it, it's all over this movie. One scene has Kakihara torturing a man by suspending him on a hook and stabbing a needle through his mouth. If that's not enough, he then pours boiling water all over the man's back and head, completely deforming him. Turns out the guy he was torturing was innocent, so whoops. As repentance for this, Kakihara cuts off his own tongue in gruesome detail and gives it to the tortured man's boss. In another scene, Ichi slices a prostitute's neck open, which just sprays blood everywhere. The practical effects are great in this movie, although in that same scene, he slices a man in half and it's early CG, so it just looks goofy as hell. There's also another kind of goofy scene where Kakihara and another woman are pulling on a man's cheeks really hard, so it kind of looks like when a grandma pinches a little kid's cheeks, but with practical effects, so it just looks really funny. They're all stretched out. This movie's really interesting because it's got these brutal practical special effects, but it's mixed in with some really cheesy CGI that just didn't hold up. So on one hand, you're utterly disturbed, and then in the next scene, you might be laughing. Man, I'm already feeling the nostalgia revisiting some of these movies, and I'm excited to get into the absolutely insane stuff coming up on the iceberg. Or coming down on the iceberg? Anyway, it's been a real treat getting back to what really launched my channel in the first place. Shout out to my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Ali Morgan, Laz Wishgender, Malediction, Hunter Piva, Tora, Heather M, Creepypasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, Hannah Broadstreet, K.A., Ricky Shadow, Chase Middleton, Koei, Matt Rozak, and Momomochi. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for the support. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus videos and a grief sticker, consider joining the Patreon. But I appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.